told us. And we tried to organize whatever you told us into certain areas in order to build a logic. Because that's the only way you do it. Secondly, that we are not evaluating your work. We are just telling the stories of your work. Again, very, very important to recognize that. Thirdly, we are not able to talk about each and every institution in isolation. We are looking at we're giving a holistic picture. We will be giving a couple of examples from some organizations. And those examples does not mean that the mentioned organizations are the only ones doing that work. We recognize that all of you are doing very, very useful work and that you are influencing your communities, in particular ways. But you are not able to mention everybody. Okay? So I think it's important to understand that, because then you appreciate if you see that we are giving examples and you are not mentioned, it does not mean that there is a problem with your work. Okay. So we said that we developed criteria to help organize the information that you gave us. And the first criteria was actually relevance. And it seems as if that you're using a wide range of strategies and tools to do your work. Some of you are using participatory theater. So you're using theater as an entry into critical human rights issues, CVE, gender issues, and so on. And participatory theater is theater that where community members also participate, in discussing the issues that are evolving from your presentation, so from the performance. So some of you, especially those institutions working in arts and culture, are using participatory theater, song and dance, performing arts for civic engagements, and so on. The media institutions are also doing some very interesting stuff, using mainstream and digital platforms for awareness creation. For instance, Buni Media, where Gado and others, they're using these platforms rather very well. Others are using entertainment and education forums, or forms in the form of, for example, radio theater, radio drama, and so on. Very, very interesting stuff. Others are nurturing talent by training young people to take photographs, to work online, to how to edit, a film, how to shoot and to edit, and so forth. So very important stuff that's coming from Slum Media Alliance of Slum Media in Mathare. Others are doing agenda setting, like you do investigative journalism, you unearth a problem, and you get the country to talk about it, as well as policymakers to pick it up. Very, very important way of intervening. And these are Wajib partners, doing this type of work. I'm sorry. Now, some of you are doing capacity development. You are building capacity of women, of communities, to increase accountability in service delivery. Others are building resilience and promoting access to justice. Of course, others are using participatory theater. We know, for instance, Haki Africa is doing this, using participatory theater to challenge shrinking civic space. Others are building community partnerships to monitor violations. We saw that in Nyeri, where Inform Action, for example, is training communities to track, violations and so on. So very, very important type of work. I think this is supposed to be collaborative women in development vetting, not cost. Why do people say cost? It's supposed to be collaborative, or is it cost?
It used to be cost.
Oh, okay. So there is a history to it. So again, using performing arts to fight radicalization of women, and cost. And that for me is very, very important because quite often when you deal with issues of radicalization, we look at young men, we don't look at women. So what we are seeing from this partner is a focus on women, as players in radicalization. The use of creative arts and capacity building for women, empowerment, economic empowerment. Actually, that are doing this. Of course, IFAFAD are also doing this. So building capacity so that women can also participate in economic, get into the marketplace, and do their work, secure their livelihoods. Including alternative ways of earning income and so on. Very, very important. Monitoring and reviewing interventions using universal tools, UPR. Some of these ways in which you are working. Then we were also interested. So we were also interested in why did you decide to do the work that you did? Because it would be so unfortunate that you just saw a call for proposals and you just wrote because you wanted some money. It would be very unfortunate. I think that it would be important for us to know motivation. And from what you told us, you say some of your activities actually are advancing your mission and vision. So, you are advancing your mission and vision. You are also supporting national efforts in countering violent extremism. Let me just add here that there was a period when CBE was too strongly driven by the need for security, other than the need to protect communities. I think that it is civil society organizations, such as yourselves, that have made it possible for rule of law and respect for human rights in the operationalization of CBE work. That communities are part and parcel of the solution. So the profiling of communities is something that I think civil society has resisted, has succeeded in ensuring that a rights-based approach is adopted. The implementation of gender empowerment constitutional provisions, that's what we are seeing with CRU, as well as other organizations, Isiolo Gender Watch, ASDEF, and others. They are saying, look, there are certain constitutional provisions which require that this country becomes more responsive to issues of gender, and that women are visible in leadership, and that they participate like everybody else, in decision making, and they are actually visible, not just as facilitators of other people to get into leadership, not just as voters, but actually also as leaders. So your work is supporting this constitutional requirement, and very, very important that others are saying, look, there is apathy amongst women and youth. Therefore, we need to debunk the belief that to acquire leadership position, you must be male and you must be rich and you must be old. And that we are challenging this, and that this is motivation, it is inspiration for you in undertaking the work that you are undertaking. I think this inspiration, this positioning is very, very fair positioning. Others, of course, are utilizing art and culture for consciousness raising. So recall the way you bring about change in the world, really, is that you have to raise the consciousness of people. You create awareness. When you create awareness, that means that you make people conscious of a particular issue. But that consciousness does not necessarily lead to anything. They're just aware. Like the way you are aware there is a door, but you don't do anything about it. Okay? But it's an important step. Because you brought the issue to the level of contemplation. Of that, actually there is a door. But you need to take it a little higher in terms of knowledge. So what is a door for? What does it facilitate? Now it's going deeper. So you raise the awareness, you increase knowledge around the phenomenon, and then you also go further and show ways in which you can use that knowledge to bring about some change. So if you turn the handle, you can actually exit. You should never assume that people know that you have to turn the handle. You help them recognize that you have to turn the handle. You don't kick it, you turn it. Once you turn it, you can exit, and so on. And so once they have taken the action, you tell them, once you have left, don't go back. Because there is danger, you go back. So our work is at all those levels, the level of awareness creation, knowledge development, preparation for change itself, and avoidance of relapse, that we don't relapse to our previous condition. So some of our partners are using the creative arts to do this. Others are using media to pursue good governance, and integrity and accountability. Others are, of course, advancing the rights of vulnerable groups, and I'm sure that James can speak to that better than I would. Others are, of course, establishing platforms for dialogue. Others are engaging government on how best to do its work. In Migori, I think in Kilifi also, I think a number of you are involved, not just in terms of budgets. For Mama na budget, it's really about that. It's like, how are women participating in shaping the budget at the county level? So civic engagement where you are talking with the duty bearers and saying, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, or even building the capacity of your of women and youth to encourage them, to put their ideas across, to engage government. So you are a facilitator of that type of engagement, which requires a different type of strategy, really. Not a strategy of hostility, but a strategy of partnership. A strategy of partnership. And where you also use language in a slightly different way. That is civic engagement. And you told us that it's a major motivation for the work that you're doing. In some cases, it's the rise of human rights violations and impunity in the country. It's like, okay, guys, we are civil society organizations. We cannot allow this impunity and the violations of our citizens to continue. So we step in, and say, you can't do this. So it's a major motivation for us to undertake our project. In other cases, it's to say, look, we need to be able to expand the economic and leadership opportunities for women. So Akira Chicks, Isiolo Gender Watch Akilidada, Siasa Place, all these people are doing this type of stuff to say, look, we need to be able to expand the opportunities for women to participate in leadership. And of course, and I did mention this at the beginning, that human rights are transversal. They are interdependent. They are connected. You violate one right, you also violate the next one, and so on. So this transversal nature of human rights ensures that even if when you're doing gender work, you are also doing other forms of rights. But those rights are political rights, civil rights, and so forth and so on. That you cannot be dealing with issues of impunity without wearing a gender lens, for example. Just because you are a man, you think that nothing can happen to you if you violate the rights of a woman. So these rights are transversal, and again, we have that from many of you, that you are treating them as such, and that is motivation for the work that you're doing. What type of tools are you using? So you're using a wide range of tools. You're using performing arts, audiovisual, digital, and new media. Others are using conventional tools. And I just want to underline these tools, especially the needs assessment. That some of you, before you start your intervention, you identify the problem. You assess the issue by working closely with your target groups. You identify the issue, you mobilize the community, you raise their awareness, you increase their knowledge. But then there are also others that are action-based approaches where you do model actions. We noticed that the Kisumu Youth Progressive, for example, models, youth assemblies, as a point of reference for an ideal assembly, and they raise issues, and those issues are then now taken to the county assembly. So there is that level of action. And with regard to some of you, again, using IC materials, information education materials, audiovisual materials, and so on. In other cases, you are building capacity for human rights. So knowledge level. Okay. Let me, before I get to engagement of rights holders, I just want to make one little comment by asking a question. Do human rights organizations require arts organizations? If I could get a response, that would be useful. Do you think human rights organizations require arts organizations? Are you better off?
Yes.
Do you want to can you give us, just give us some feedback here?
Yeah, I don't think that they require art organizations because it's very easy for people to consume art. In that way, if there's any message that's being put across by the human rights organization, people are able to put it in a palatable way if it's in an art form.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because like what we say, music is the universal language, and music is art, and everyone appreciates art, so it's easier.
Absolutely. The reason I asked that question is I wanted you to reflect back to what we discussed earlier about the cognitive domain and the affective domain. Huh? Yes, Betty.
No, I was also going to say how it has the ability to engage in a conversation in a non-threatening way.
In a non-threatening manner.
Becomes just, especially if you're dealing with adults, most people are visual by nature. And so it becomes so much more effective
Absolutely.
to communicate in practical terms.
Absolutely. So the tools that you are using this diversity of tools. You have performing arts, you have capacity development, you are creating IEC materials, you are doing all these things. But at the center of it all is that if you want to be able to turn the technical information, technical human rights content into a form that creates a connection, between the issue and your audiences, then you have no choice than to go in the direction of arts, culture, and media. Because that forces your audience to connect with the issue, in a much more, in a stronger way than if it was just processed mentally. It's also processed emotionally, through feelings, through the heart, and so on. And in a non-threatening manner. And I think that again, we will see how that is being done. So your choice of the diversity of tools has a basis, has a strong basis. Okay. And then later I will also say that it's the diversity of tools that delivers the results we want. We've been quite frustrated in the past that we are doing so much work and yet we're not seeing the results. It's just because our tools have been unleashed in isolation. They have not been effectively connected. So, there was the question, how are rights holders engaged in your work? Are you involving rights holders in your work? And again, you told us that yes, we do actually involve these rights holders because we work in the community and they are involved in capacity development and public participation. They are involved in co-creation of our interventions. So they are not external to the intervention, they are part and parcel of that process. Sometimes they get direct representation in the project. So they are actually delivering the project with us. Sometimes we actually mobilize them for collective action. So we are organizing a demonstration or a petition, they are actively involved there. So they are part of it. In other cases, it's like when we are doing our needs identification, we work with them, they become our research assistants, they become our informants, they become all sorts of, so they are actually involved in the project. So they are part of it. With regard to media, if you're using a media, I think that Inform Action and those of you who work with media, you know that you must get consent from people, before you actually use their footage and so on. So they do sign off their approval for you to do that. In some cases, you also get them to be part of mentorship programs. So they are part of the mentorship, so they are involved. They co-create with you. Sometimes they work and own the project, so cultural institutions, whether it's a council of imams, the council of imams is a cultural institution, it's a religious institution, is involved in this. No, isn't it? Yeah, so they are participating in it. The project is not external to them. They are part of it. Some are involved in self-help initiatives, and of course they could also be involved in promoting access to basic social services. So in other words, you told us that your beneficiaries are engaged. You're not just going there to do your stuff, alafu mnatoka, hapana, ni kwamba they are also part of it. So we were also interested in, is your work actually having any effect? in the community. And what we saw, at least what you told us, is that there is an increase in access to justice by women. For example, in parts of the country, women are organizing themselves. They are self-organizing to demand their rights. They are self-organizing, and that's a good sign. That communities are reporting rights violations. I think I don't know what that was. Isiro Gender Watch or one of the organizations, basically saying that they are noticing more men, kind of also saying, hata sisi wanaume tumekataa. This gender-based violence is unacceptable. You have also noticed an increase in the number of women who are in local administration, appointed by, in the county assemblies, in the county positions and so on. Improved knowledge and ability of women to access market economy, IT skills. I think there is quite a bit of that in terms of accessing market economy. Marked improvement in retention and transition of girls in ASAL areas, girls' rights clubs, and I don't know what that was in Marsabit, where we have girls forming themselves into clubs to be able to push for their rights to education. Increased self-enrollment of men and use of male involvement. So men also becoming champions of gender rights. You also told us that there is improvement in documentation and reporting of human rights violations. So communities are documenting, these violations themselves, and they are reporting. And that might also explain why there's a lot of stuff in the media, because communities are reporting. Creation of safe spaces for citizens to freely express themselves. So we have online spaces. So we have Twitter and hashtags. We push hashtags online, to speak. And that is actually quite positive. And government sometimes responds to the hashtags, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And communities are also able to demand respect for their rights and the need for due process and demand accountability by law enforcement agencies. We're seeing a lot of that in the coast, and as well as northeastern Kenya, where communities are demanding, that their rights be respected. Again, as a consequence of the work that civil society is doing and our DBA2 partners are doing. So integrated alternative livelihood improvement initiatives. And I think, again, I came across this at the coast, where it's not just about CVE, it's also about how do you create opportunities for work for the youth, so that they're not susceptible to radicalization. And I think this is so important, that our security work should go hand in hand with economic and social facilitations from below. And I think that civil society has a responsibility to keep pushing this, that the more you create jobs, the more you improve the lives of people, the more unlikely they will be to be tempted to move to the other side. So these things are supposed to work hand in hand. And I think that these integrated alternative livelihoods are very important to try and minimize radicalization, because you are giving hope to communities. So we are also seeing emergence of civic culture generally. More and more people are talking about rights, and we have seen that with regard to current initiatives to try and change the constitution. There is also better relationship and knowledge on how to work with authorities. In the past, if you wanted to engage the police, it was very difficult, isn't it? But now we are able to engage with them. They are opening the door. We are saying, look, open a gender desk in your police station for us to be able to report to a woman police officer on violation of women's rights. And the police service is listening to some of this. So again, we are also learning as civil society how to engage these agencies. Yeah, and I think that we are also building social audit and accountability forums to deepen understanding of corruption scandals and delivery of services. I think Siasa Place, with the scorecard and accountability of leaders, is providing us with this opportunity. Okay. We are increasing efficiency by engaging right holders from the concept of interventions. I think this we have already said, that we are not waiting to go and do an evaluation, but rather, they are actively involved from the beginning, and that we are also using existing structures and infrastructure to strengthen collaboration. I think we would like to see more with regard to especially the collaboration between the partners, for skills enhancement and knowledge enhancement, and really be able to accelerate the process through shared knowledge. With regard to whether you're having an impact, obviously there is improved knowledge. Again, this is coming from you. Not that we have any numbers, any figures, or whatever, but this is what you told us. That there is more access to information, there is more empowerment of communities and more resilience, and that there is more cohesion, in our communities over dialogue. There was a time you saw a Somali and you panicked. But now we are no longer panicking as a people, isn't it? Because of the work that's being done. So there is more, understanding that you cannot profile communities, that you cannot profile a religion. It's not the religion that's doing this, it's particular individuals that are doing these things. So there is more understanding of these things. And of course, there is general reduction of profiling of youth by security agents. Yes, Betty?
Is it okay and can be given Twitter handle in case someone wants to use?
A Twitter handle or a hashtag?
A hashtag we have.
Okay, for us it is Toeza Coms.
So we tag you.
Yes.
You can tag us.
That's what we want, and that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, Toeza Coms.
Toeza Coms.
Yeah, Toeza Coms with double M, and S, a commission. And I think that many people also, you can also tag on some of your friends. You can also tag me if you want to have fun,
And you're still like.
And we are still live, yes. Thank you. Thank you. So if you want to tag us, it's Toeza Coms. And you can also tag Kimani Wanjovu. Okay. So what else are we seeing? What else are we seeing again? It's more of confidence building. It seems as if more and more young people, more and more women are feeling more confident that they can actually take up leadership positions, not as afraid as they were before. Therefore, general improvement in reporting of cases, change of perceptions and attitudes toward gender-based violence, and there are also mentorship initiatives. I think that again that came through pretty well. The nurturing of a new generation of leaders, especially women and youth. More enhanced capacity by citizens to demand access to quality services, and more employment and business opportunities for youth. I think that especially where Hiva Fund is giving some money for economic opportunities, or where Akilidada is building capacities in terms of options available, and so on. So people are feeling like, well, there is an opportunity that's being created through the Wajibwe 2 project. Okay. For Naivasha, for Kijabert, we saw environmental conservation, concerns, and again working with communities for over issues of climate change, environmental conservation, and planting of trees, and so on. Again, we didn't see a lot of that. And we didn't see many of you, at least you didn't tell us, that you are doing work on climate change. Yeah, I think that you need to find a way of integrating gender issues and climate change. Because as we said, when you have adverse effects of climate change, the first are actually women. Because food scarcity, and so on. And therefore, I think that there is an opportunity to treat some of these things as cross-cutting in our programming work. Even with regard to leadership, generally, how do you integrate that consciousness in your leaders as you do your capacity development, consciousness about climate change and the issues that are around us, so that once these people take up leadership positions, they can actually become champions of a more green, nation. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about sustainability, because this is something that comes up every time. How sustainable is your project? Everybody asks that question. So to organize this, we treated this into 3 levels. So the first level is individual level, institutional level, and community level. At the individual level, the projects are sustainable to the extent that you are giving knowledge to your communities. And once you exit, you don't exit with that knowledge. That knowledge continues and within the community, and it continues being utilized at the community level. So you're given the skills, you don't exit with the skills. You leave. So to the extent that those skills continue, one could then say that to a certain extent, the program is sustainable because it imparted skills that are being utilized in the community. Now, of course, what you could do is go back, after 2 years of your project to see who is actually utilizing the skills that you gave and who is not, and what it is they have done. Of course, they not necessarily do a replica of what you did. They could creatively enhance it, enhance the project, by introducing new things and so on. And that is all right. At the institutional level, some of you have signed commitment, have gotten government at the county level or the national level to sign commitments to certain things, especially at the county level. So if you have MOUs, and some of you told us that their MOUs have been signed by with the county government to do certain things. So if that is the case, then the project is sustainable because the MOU stands, and you can keep updating it even at the expiry of the project. And that is actually happening, especially with regard to gender mainstreaming and so on. With regard to CVE, we know that, for instance, in Kwale, they have been able to develop CV mechanisms, which are much more integrative than was previously the case. How communities will become involved in helping, with countering radicalization and so on. How women can become more involved. So these mechanisms at the county level are also indicative of the sustainability of the project. Where you have situations of communities documenting violations, it does not necessarily mean that the documentation will stop after you exit. Communities, once empowered, will continue documenting these and pushing on their own. And that is really, really key. For those of you who are using digital platforms, online platforms, e-content, and so on, digital films and music, Once the project comes to an end, the digital content continues being consumed, by people. And therefore, you do not erase it. The project, kind of the content gets a life of its own, continues influencing people in different ways, and so forth and so on. Some have established rescue centers, rehabilitation centers, community dialogue forums. Those community dialogue forums are not going to stop just because the project came to an end, or the rescue center, or the rehabilitation center. The community will take up this, So there is a sense in which the projects, the Wajib projects, are sustainable in that way. Within your own institutions, you are developing your own capacities. So you are becoming better implementers. Your capacities have been built in terms of how to keep your records and to document, and how even to budget and account for your. Once the project comes to an end, that knowledge that has been given to you will continue, within your. So there is an element of institutional development, and sustainability of that capacity that has been given to you. At the community level, the community ownership. Our communities are very resilient. They are very receptive to new ideas. If an idea is good, they'll take this idea and run with it. If it's not a good idea, they'll close the door. So those activities that are sustainable are those that are owned also really by the communities. And for ownership, you have to involve them right from the beginning. I think working with CBOs, you did mention, I think there are a couple that mentioned that you're working with CBOs, and the CBOs are community-based. So again, end of the project does not necessarily mean that the CBO will stop doing the work that it does. Because we need to be able to say, look, you have the skills, you have the knowledge, and you are able to continue with the work. So what are we learning so far from the work that Wajib Wetu partners are doing? We are learning quite a number of things. The first thing that we are learning is that human rights organizations, gender focused organizations, governance organizations are using arts, culture, and media to advance their work. So in addition to your usual approaches of capacity development, IEC materials, and so on, you are also now utilizing the arts, performing arts, visual arts, and so on, and that you are targeting both the cognitive and affective domains when addressing sensitive cultural issues. Issues that cannot be addressed, in any other way. You are able to talk about women's rights through music, through theater. You are able to talk about leadership and corruption and so on, through the arts. And that is, we talked about affective and emotional connections with the issues so that the issues are not, do not appear to be foreign because you are connected with them. We are also learning that from the Wajib Wetu partners, you are working in a continuum of social change. And the way the continuum works is that you create awareness of the project, of the program. So you are doing awareness raising programs. You are also building knowledge, because again, you mentioned knowledge severally in your interviews. But you are also exploring solutions, in your work and suggesting ways in which a new behavior is possible. So that continuum is manifest in your in some of your work. We're also learning that for change to happen, we must have a multi-pronged approach. It is not just one approach. You can't say, ati kwangu ni hapa tu, atuache nifuate lane yangu. No, unafuata lane yako, yes, but then you also build networks, yeah, that support you. Kwa sababu hapa kuna mtu wa baiskeli anapitia, kuna mtu wa bodaboda, kuna pedestrian anakuchanganya. Si ni kweli? So you need to be able to be conscious of the whole ecosystem of the issues that we are addressing, and therefore a multi-pronged approach is really the way to go. And crucially also, that given the nature of our country, given the fact that our country is extremely youthful, over 60% of the country is under 35 years old. If that is the case, then for real change to happen in this country, we must invest in youth empowerment. They must see the connection between their predicament, the challenges they are facing, and the type of governance that is there, and the type of leadership that is there. They must be able to see that connection. And that the work we are doing in human rights, in gender, in democracy, using of arts, culture, and media, and so on, really ought to be contributing to youth empowerment, for genuine and sustainable change in our country. And that we are also learning that women empowerment can be accelerated when we use art forms to build confidence and challenge stereotypes and patriarchy. That sometimes patriarchy cannot be tackled through the rational lens. You cannot dismantle patriarchy through the rational lens. Sometimes you have to wear the lens of emotion and feeling, and affection to build empathy, to dismantle it. Even as you work on advocacy to build systems that protect women's rights. So all these things kind of work together. And I think that the investment in arts for women's rights is really, really critical. Really, really, really critical. Because it builds confidence in young women to challenge power, but at the same time, challenges power held by men in a non-threatening manner, because it forces them to reflect on their actions, and so on. We're also learning that it is possible to engage county governments. We know that that's happening at the coast. It's happening in Migori. It's happening in Marsabit. It's happening in Wajir. These county governments are actually involved in working with civil society to kind of support accountability and transparency and inclusion, so that the county government does not see itself as delinked, from civil society. I mean, it needs to see and appreciate the role of civil society in the conduct of its work. And our role, of course, becomes that of a facilitator. We are encouraging communities to take an interest in budget circles, take an interest in budget priorities, and so on, and to attend public participation forums and to give input and so forth and so on. So we need to be able to even interpret the budget to our constituents, so that they can understand, how to engage the county government, even further. So we are learning this. We are learning the need to be able to build political will in support of human rights, gender, and democracy. And we are also saying, and we're also learning, that the tools we use must be aligned age, gender, and cultural context. That our tools must be sensitive to the context in which we work. Because in a country that is highly illiterate, or in an area that is highly illiterate, because we have some areas in this country that register 70% illiteracy rates. Why should you take books to the community when you know very well that they'll not read the book? Instead, you can actually do audio-visual. You can package alternatively. Do it through music, do it through short films, and so on, and use that as the point of entry. So sensitivity to the tools that we're using. Why take technical documents to communities? Like the budget, take the huge budget and tell the community, in your budget here, and then installment. It's not facilitative. It's not facilitative, but you can actually translate that budget into something very, very simple in the local language. Just make it possible for community members to engage. So the tools we use ought to be sensitive to the audience that we're working with, the gender, and the age. What else are we learning? We are learning about the flexibility and adaptability. We are learning that we must always work directly with the communities. We cannot deliver without involving our beneficiaries or our project participants. We have to always involve them at all levels. So we are saying tools and strategies will succeed if they find wider community involvement and so on. What else are we learning? We are learning that we must adapt ourselves to the COVID lifestyle. Wearing masks, working digitally, keeping safe distances, and so on. So using technology, to be able to do this. So we are learning it, and we are learning because COVID is here for a longer time, and we must continue doing human rights work, we must continue doing gender work, we must continue doing democracy work with COVID, but we must adapt our tools appropriately to do that. Otherwise, all the work we have done will come to zero. So how do we survive? How do we survive and keep working even with COVID? And so on. So this sensitivity to the contextual, health situation is also an important tool. I would like to pause here and then maybe get one or two comments before we get to the recommendations. Any comments so far? Question, reflection, worries? Is this making sense to you? I could just be talking. I'm a mwalimu, I'm a teacher. I can just be talking to myself. I don't want to talk to myself. Are we together? Have I lost anybody? Are you with me? Harrison, are you with me? You can see that your working environment is connected to work in human rights. You can see that?
Sure.
Very good.
And it's Nelson, not Harrison.
Nelson. Yes, Nelson. Yeah, Nelson, you can see the connection.
Sure.
Absolutely. Ruth,
Yes.
are you seeing the connection?
Very closely.
Yes, seeing the connection.
Yes.
James Kibaki,
Yes.
how are you doing so far? Can you see the connection?
I'm very proud because if a professor is involved in disability, now you're the teacher.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much. I think this is so important that we must always see the connection between the work we do and the context in which we are working. And to see that the work we do is not isolated from the bigger picture. So let's move on to what appear to be some of the recommendations that could come out of this study. Now, we must always be learning organizations. We must learn all the time. That means that we should never assume that we are complete. Yani tumefika in terms of knowledge, in terms of the tools we use, in terms of the strategies we use. We must always learn best practice and so on. And one of the things that we are seeing is that COVID-19 has of course disrupted the ways in which we work. It is not likely to be the last pandemic that the world experiences, because with climate change, other pandemics are likely to pop up going forward. And yet humanity must continue improving itself and learning. So, how do we do this? Remember the first question I asked you: do human rights organizations require arts organizations? And you say yes, they require arts organizations. Equally, arts and media organizations require human rights organizations, require gender-driven organizations, require democracy and governance-driven organizations. Because it is very likely that if there is no dialogue between these capabilities, your work in human rights will be undermined by the creative sector, because the creative sector may not understand clearly what human rights are all about. Tunaelewana? So it's very important for us to kind of find convergences and work together. I mentioned that artistic freedom is protected by the Constitution of Kenya, and that artistic freedom is part of the freedom of expression. So the creative sector is protected. But if they look at their artistic freedom in isolation of other provisions of freedoms, the freedom to have decent life and so on, they'll just work in isolation as creators. And of course, there is always this conversation in the creative sector whether we should not be pushing for art's sake. Yani ngoma kwa ajili ya ngoma tu. Yani ufurahie tu, ujifeel uko sawa. They're saying yes, you can create art to just make yourself feel good. But art also has this other responsibility to society, to be able to help resolve some of the issues in our society. Because art is also about an expression of who we are, as well as an expression of who we were, as well as an expression of who we could be, the type of society we could. So the creative sector is able to imagine a different world. Equally, when you're doing human rights, you're doing work in terms of who we are, our situation. This is our situation in terms of gender. But you're also saying who we could be. You're giving capabilities to communities to imagine who they could actually be and how they could become that. So the purpose of art is not divorced from the purpose of human rights. There is a lot of convergence, So the only way we can succeed is by enriching each other through peer-to-peer learning. You know, where those of you who work on gender are also teaching the musicians on what it means to wear a gender lens or to have a human rights lens. They're also teaching painters how to do it, you know. And with humility, they will learn. And equally, you're also learning on how to push your imagination even further and how the creative sector operates. So, we are saying do strengthen linkages, build partnerships and networks, especially because you're also involved in shifting power. Political power, economic power, and social power, and cultural power. You are shifting things. So you need to be able to have broader partnerships. Yeah. So that you are also protected. You're also protecting yourselves, you know, and leveraging on each other's capabilities. And that you are also not contradicting each other's messages. So, Nelson, with working in environmental conservation, also understands the gender dimension to environmental conservation. Tunaelewana? Yeah. So that when he's doing his work in environment, he also wears a gender lens. You know? And of course, those working in gender are also conscious of environmental issues and what it means to work with the context of a changing environment and urbanization and so forth and so on. I think that this has been done. I think that's one of the things that we have to keep learning is that the creative sector offers a wide array of tools which could be used. One tool that is emerging rather quickly now is the spoken word artist. And that spoken word artist is really becoming rather powerful in this country. So again, how can we leverage on this art form? You know, is there something that we need to learn? You know, how can we make the message in the spoken word more powerful than it currently is? How can we make it more diverse and so on? Does that mean, for example, using local languages, Kiswahili? You know, Nurumna spoken word coast. Ziko, yeah. So if at the coast you have the spoken word artist, is there something they can teach the upcountry spoken word artists, you know, in terms of performing in Kiswahili, the spoken word, you know, and so on. If it is short films, like the 5-minute, you know, clips that Inform Action is famous for, is that something that could actually be taught to other groups? You know, how do people work with the religious groups? Is that something that the Council of Imams could actually teach? You know, an institution that is working on gender, like CRU, on how to work with religious groups and so on. You know, and so really, how do we build this capacity across our network? Is what you go to. To what extent are we using even local languages? I mean, some of our languages are extremely gender insensitive. Yeah. Ethnic insensitive and gender insensitive. So how do we do cultural engineering to make them more gender receptive? You know? That means now working with wazee, working with the wazee so that they can also refine the language to make it even more gender. Even disability rights. I mean, you know, we've done lots of work in terms of even just letting people know that there are certain things you can't say because they are disability insensitive. So how are we changing language of disability so that it's much more human rights driven? How vipi namna gani Kibaki? Si ni kweli? We are shifting. I mean now we do not refer to people in terms of their disability.
It was just the other day that with Kibaki, we were told that we shall not call them as people living with disability.
Yeah.
It should be people with disability.
Yeah. PWDs.
Yes.
Absolutely. Because they
And just the other day.
very good example. In Kiswahili, we are saying you please let us look at we don't call them walemavu. It's watu wenye ulemavu. Yule ni mlemavu, hapana bana. We don't do that. And also just so how do we keep improving ourselves, our knowledge and so on deliberately. But hii kitu kimekuwepo zamani, lazima kiendelee hivyo hivyo. We are change agents, isn't it? We are changing our societies, we are changing our communities. So continually learning and shifting things. Now, what are we recommending to development partners? We are saying, hey guys, arts, culture, and media add much value to the work of human rights, gender, and democracy. Arts, culture, and media are not a footnote to social transformation. Arts, culture, and media are integral to societal change because they have capacity to not only target our cognitive domain, our affective domain, but also something else that I haven't mentioned before, the instinctive domain. The instinct for survival. Let me just do an illustration of this. If a lion just walked into this room, like right now, what would you do? What would you do? Will you stop to think ati sasa hapa panaitwa aje? Will you stop to think about those things? What is the natural instinct? To run for. So it's an instinct of survival. And we invoke it. In the creative sector, we invoke the instinct for the preservation of humanity. We are able to do that. Something you can't do through the technical documents. The instinct for survival. Yani kuendelea kuishi duniani. Yes.
There was a saying about a cat that once sat on a hot stove that will never again sit on a stove, even if it's cold.
Yes, because it was programmed.
Yes.
Absolutely, it's an instinct for survival, self-preservation. And you can't do that in any other way in terms of bringing to the level of consciousness. So for development partners, they're saying, look, guys, do invest in this. And also, invest in modeling behavior in the communities. Because if you have, the more women you have in leadership, the more likely it will be for younger women to want to join leadership positions because they can see their gender represented. They see an image of themselves in leadership, and therefore they aspire to be. Because that's how we learn. If you want to change the farming habits of communities, you introduce a successful farmer in that community, and you make it possible for them to succeed by giving them the resources, doing irrigation, and so on. And other people are likely to copy that behavior. Human beings copy. You start a matatu in one route, suddenly you have how many? You have unlimited number of matatus. Because in Anakan, hey, what is matatu in the Anakan is going to succeed. Now, you open a kiosk and suddenly you have a lot of kiosks. You open a new fashion, a new type of clothing, and suddenly a lot of people are wearing that same type. We are a copying species. We like seeing success, we like seeing good things and taking them up. So investing in role modeling and you can do that through the arts, is really, really useful. Supporting and strengthening CSO networks, again for development partners, to be able to see the need for networks, because those networks can only be beneficial. So human rights organizations working in partnership with media organizations, working in partnership with arts organizations, culture organizations, to deliver a similar vision, as a similar goal. Very, very important. And there is nothing wrong actually in funding coalitions. There's nothing wrong in funding coalitions. I think that funding individual organizations is good, but also funding coalitions also is supporting the development of our various institutions. Those institutions that are involved in, but you know that it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. Sometimes development partners want you to show results. Ati kwa nini hii sheria haijabadilishwa? But it's not within your domain. You can push a lot of things. It takes time. So long-term investment in institutions is actually very, very helpful. For ourselves, yeah, flexibility. Flexibility. I think that we have to be able to work what I call downstream as well as upstream. Downstream, knowledge, we're giving knowledge, creating awareness, strengthening our communities, mobilizing our communities, doing all sorts of things downstream. But we also need to go back to the root cause. We need to go upstream to ask the question, why does this problem exist? And what can we do about this problem? That is solving a problem before it occurs. Instead of waiting for the problem to occur and then we solve it. Okay? So we have to ask, if it is CVE, we have to ask the question, why are our youth being radicalized? Why are they susceptible to radicalization? Okay? And then we solve that problem. Why are women not participating in national politics? Once you ask the question why, then you are in the direction of the root cause, and you are in the process of solving the source of the problem, instead of waiting for the problem to occur. So this is very important. So we work downstream and we work upstream. We are doing it, but we have to do it consciously and deliberately. Sasa jamani? Yeah, consciously, deliberately. And of course, we are not saying that one organization needs to do all that. Sometimes you do it through networks. Nyinyi mnafanya upstream, sisi tunafanya downstream, lakini tuna collaborate. Or we are sharing our notes. Si ni kweli jamani? Yeah, we are sharing our notes, and you're like, hey jamani, there is this issue ambayo inatusumbua, hebu ichukueni, and then you run with it. Then, that we are also saying that the more grassroots-based, consultative, and engaging a project is, the more rooted it is in the community, the more it's likely to succeed. Again, we are learning that from the work you are doing, and saying that we need communities to kind of own the projects that we undertake. Okay. Another key recommendation is, please guys, let's program based on evidence as much as possible. So we should conduct needs assessments, tease out the issues with our community, then design the program that best works for them. Okay? Within their own context. So that we are not taking up everything, Let us continue learning from our culture. So, you see, culture, and let me just clarify this, that there is a problem where people assume that tradition is the same thing as culture. Culture is dynamic. Culture is dynamic, it's always changing. It transforms itself on account of new knowledge, new understanding, and so on. So, for example, when we are dealing with rights, as a cultural practice, you say we are getting rid of cultural practices that are harmful to sectors of our society. That is a very legitimate process because cultures change on account of new knowledge, on account of new understanding, new social, political, economic dynamics. Now, so we have to continue engaging our cultures, but also cultures do facilitate certain things. So our cultures have proverbs, our cultures have songs, our cultures have stories, and so on and so on. So how can we harvest those things to advance human rights, to advance gender equality, to advance, democracy and more consultation and so on and so on? What type of institutions exist in the culture that can be used to change it? Tunaelewana jamani? So it's like we need to look at the culture to understand it in order for us to change it. You cannot change something that you do not understand. So continued learning, continued reflection. Let's continue, again, as a key recommendation, monitoring and reviewing our projects systematically, because that's the only way we can improve them. So we track the progress we are making, we see where we may not be doing very well, and we make the requisite adjustments to strengthen our work. Because our work is about social change. Our work is about social change. Wajibu wetu, Forum C is a facilitator of our work. They are not the end game. We do not exist because Forum C exists. We exist because we are committed to social change. Then Forum C steps in and helps us do that. Sasa jamani, because if we recognize that, then our work will have more reward to ourselves as well as to our communities. Let's build networks, let's build partnerships, let us adopt an ecosystem approach to the issues that we are facing or engaging with, so that instead of looking at one issue in isolation, we see the issue as a continuum of other issues. Okay. Obviously, we interviewed the national government, certain players in the national government, and some of the issues that came out clearly is that they do need to provide an enabling environment for the arts, culture, and media to thrive. Because we have already said that arts, culture, and media are important for human rights, are important for gender equality, are important for democracy. So they need to provide that facilitative environment, and especially with the implementation of artistic freedom and the development of policies that they need to implement constitutional provisions related to human rights, gender equality at the national level. They need to do that, as part of their responsibility to the citizens. They need to finalize, in the case of culture, the national heritage and culture policy. And with regard to ICT and the use of audiovisuals, they are saying they will review every video and classify it before it's online. this is in the draft legislation, that everything you want to put on YouTube should be reviewed by Ezekiel Mutua. And then they'll classify it or reject it. You can't do that for many reasons. First, how many videos are produced every day in this country on smartphones or what and put in there? Even just from a logistical point of view, it's virtually impossible. But it is the legislation that is being proposed. So I think that human rights organizations, those of you guys who are also working in gender and democracy, need to be aware of the changes that are being proposed, so that we can also do advocacy work around it. As an institution, as Toyota Communications, as well as the Creative Economy Working Group, we have written to Parliament about these proposals, because they are not good for the country. But they could still pass. Yeah, they could still pass. So again, how do you help? How does the national government create a facilitative environment for the work of human rights, for the work of gender, for the work of governance, and so on? For the county governments, I think it's basically again issues of creative hubs for the sector, making sure that we have space to do our work, without feeling like we are threatened. More space, more creative spaces, creative hubs, and so on. Identification of talent, identification of new leadership, and so on. And also, really evolving approaches to the county, so that we can have more rapid change, so that they are also picking the best, and utilizing them. I know like Kipia is doing a lot of work with the digital platforms. Yeah, doing a lot of work with apps, and we've been tracking these in terms of what Governor Nedito is doing. Apps for agriculture, apps for animal, for livestock, and so forth and so on. And that's really good. So who else is doing this, in terms of the county investing, in the innovations and creativity that changes our society? I think that's it.
That's it.
Really? I guess maybe some comments. Do you have any comments? Does this again, just to go back, remember this is work that is still ongoing. We have not finished. We are sharing with you what we have seen from the interviews. And so we are intellectualizing it. We are giving it an intellectual lens to organize all that material, and then be able to build a logic for advocacy, for arts, culture, and media in support of human rights, gender, and democracy. So I think at this point, I'll take comments. Yeah, we'll go with the Nelson.
Yeah, I think it's great that we are having this forum, and it's quite, I would say, timely within the time that each of the partners are part in implementing the project that they are implementing. So that even when we are progressing, there are some of the lessons that we have learned that we can be able to embrace in the remaining part of the projects that we are carrying out. And also the fact that Toreza is coming into harmonize and maybe give all of the partners a perspective of what each is doing, a perspective of what is necessary for all of us to achieve, and especially towards human rights, because I think with human rights.
In this journey of learning, and as a partner, as a partner learning with you, working with you, and also just finding how best you can support each other. Any other comment? Yes. Oh my God. Damaris, yes. Akilidada, Damaris. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really like the recommendations, the learnings. Two especially resonate with me. One of being a learning organization, because right now a lot of things are changing, even with the current pandemic, and we need to continue improving ourselves, because if we get stuck in the traditional way of doing, we're going to get left behind. Involve our communities before creating these interventions. Doing a need assessment is very important, because you can't sit in a forum like this one and decide this is what people in Turkana need without going to Turkana and finding out exactly what is the problem and how can we help you that is that you're looking for. And then I like the using arts and the human rights. As a leader, we if we don't use art, but I really do recognize the way art speaks to the heart first, other than the mind, and how it is important to sort of leverage on that. So this is really informative, and I don't know if you're gonna share this slides with us, yeah, so that we can take some of these learnings back to where we are currently.
Yeah, settings. Yes, we will share. Please do not over share because they're still working.
Yeah.
Okay, so just use them for your work, because we are still improving, we are still learning, we are doing other things with them. But we will definitely, I think we're sharing this to all Wadibet partners on Monday. I think we are doing sharing all this to all our partners on Monday. And again, to just say that the opportunity, you see, if you take the view that you are always incomplete when you are in this world, that when you are in this world, you are incomplete at every level. If you take that view, then you will always learn. But if you take the view that you are complete, nimefika, you will stop learning. So being in institutions is so important, because we can always improve whatever we do. We can always improve whatever we do. So Damaris, you're so right, and I think that we will continue. We did, as I said, meet with the Arts, Culture and Media group on Wednesday. They all understand that there is need for them to enhance their knowledge of human rights and gender and democracy. So they appreciate that, they recognize that. You have the knowledge on how to do this. They have the knowledge on how to package stuff. So the question then becomes, how do you support each other so that you can deliver on the vision and mission of Wadibuet? How do you support each other to enhance yourselves, so because you should always learn. There could even be a musician in you. It's just that you have never discovered it. But by interacting with someone who works in music, that musician in you might suddenly pop up. Who knows? So I think it is just knowing that learning is a tremendous opportunity that we have as a human species, and that we can always become better in whatever we do. No. Onaje, uko sawa? Niongezee kidogo. Wajisikiaje?
Mimi nimesikia vizuri. Hususan kutaja mambo ya culture, let me change to English. I really appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that we need to go back and learn from our culture, then try to complement what we can improve from our culture. Because many of the things that we are seeing today is the results of abandoning our culture. We become so like modernized and trying to see all our cultures like they are a bit bad. As we tend to over publicize the bad things in our culture, and we tend to like publicize the more good that we have in it. So I think going forward, we should also look forward into learning and also implement what is coming from learning.
So thanks a lot for that, Nuru. So there are a couple of things that we do with culture. There are some things that were suppressed by the colonial experience, by history, which were really good. So we talk about retrieval. We can retrieve certain things in our cultures that enhance gender equality, that enhance human rights, that enhance democracy and consultation and inclusion and so on. Because they were suppressed by historical factors. We want to retrieve. We retrieve that. But there are also certain parts of our culture that are no longer applicable to the contemporary world on account of new knowledge, new dynamics, new processes, and so on. New knowledge. And our changes. So those ones we put aside. And again, we're working with the communities, because if we don't work with the communities, any change that we introduce that is cultural will not be sustainable. So working with communities makes it possible for us to have sustainable change, because they own the process. And they are agents, they are the beneficiaries and agents of culture. So there are those things that we retrieve, there are those things that we put aside, and there are also those things that we introduce in the culture. Again, working with our communities. There was a time, as a lady, you could not wear trousers in this country. Yeah. I mean, it's like, what? She put on a pair of trousers. I tell you, it was serious. In some people's mind, it is still serious. Kwamba msichana hatakiwi kuvaa trouser. Kuna watu wanaamini hilo bado. But you see, they are for women to wear trousers. So there are things we introduce in the culture, there are things we put aside in the culture, and there are things that we retrieve. The idea also is to introduce a critical eye in our communities in terms of what we take and what we don't take. Because our communities are also consuming mass media, global mass media. So what is it that they should not take? And of course, you don't do that as saying you must not engage communities in dialogue and to bring about the change that you'd like to see. So these are the things, and I think that the more we dig into our cultures, the more we realize that we have not harvested even a fifth of what we should actually be harvesting. Especially with climate change, there's so much that we could actually use from the culture to mitigate climate change and so on. Additional comments? There was Sally, yeah.
First of all, it's an observation on the way you brought up the issue of tradition and culture. I think it is important for also, as different organizations, to also try to bring that aspect out to the communities we're serving. that there's a difference between the traditional culture, what we need to maintain, what we need to improve on, what we need to discard. And also it brings out the issue of also the same way we have religion and spirituality, the same way also we would at an individual level, how to separate a personality from character. So with that in mind, the way we say that you had a particular forum where you met with the arts organizations, and now you're meeting with the human rights-based organizations. So is there a particular time where these two could meet, such that we even do pairing of organizations, so that in particular regions, who can we pair between these two organizations so that we're able to bring out the whole aspect even better? And right now we know with the COVID situation, and even before COVID, we cannot afford to work in silos. So how are we able to strengthen? Because at the end of the day, it's not only about competition, but how are we serving communities to bring about change as we want it to be? And there's also the idea of we know we are not on equal footing with regards to technology and also intellectual capacities. So even with how we're using culture to equalize the equilibrium, how are we engaging different aspects, different stakeholders to ensure that as much as this will make arts and culture makes it palatable, makes it, there's that balance where different stakeholders at different levels in the internationalism are able to sit down together and still bring out the change that we want. How do we also, is another question. For me, I've seen that even in different organizations, the tools that are brought about capture so well the monitoring perspectives. But there's a gap now in now processing the documentation process, such that now we are all going to package it in such a way when we're looking into the historical perspective of measuring the longitudinal change, it brings about what you wanted to capture. Because I feel like that's a bit of a disconnect, that 5 years down the line, yes, we were able to see the rapid social change, for example. But now when it comes to now trying to pin down or also now analyzing or presenting it to the target audience that yes, we were able to do this then, now we are going to do this now, but it's not being captured well, it's not being brought out well. So how organizations really help to go there now? Yeah.
Maybe let me start with your question about how do we track the changes that are coming out of our interventions. Normally, the way you do that is when you're doing your needs assessment, you also get a sense of what's the status of the situation. And once you get, and I mean, the challenge that I always find is that sometimes we set very high goals rather than being modest in terms of what we can actually do. That we seek to do too much. But we just identify just a few things that we are able to track. And you just do this systematically. You'll be able to see the changes it's occurring, over time. For instance, if you're working on leadership in a particular county, and you are, what you're saying is that your purpose is to increase the number of women who are vying for positions in the county level. Okay. So when you're doing your needs assessment, you also find out like how many women do we have that vied in the last time, and then now bring in your intervention, and you build capacity and confidence and so on, and trust in institutions and so on. Work with political parties for nomination and so on. And then after sometimes you're able to come back and say, well, it seems as if the following people went through our training, X number went through our training. This is what we've seen actually presented themselves as candidates, and so on. Maybe one was elected, maybe nobody was elected. Why were they not elected, and so on and so on. And I think that tracking of what the status of our situation, what is our intervention, and what has happened post our intervention. I know, for example, that with CVE, a classic example, the CBE, there was a time when communities were profiled. Communities were seen as enemies. So you could say, it seems like our community is profiled. And then you work with agents, to kind of enhance their capacity to understand that that's not the way to work. And then you can track it. Well, because of our intervention, this is what has actually happened. And the agents would also even mention that the change has occurred because of you. Now, one of the challenges always with this type of work is attribution. Because if you are working in Baringo, you're not the only ones working in Baringo. There are very many other groups working in Baringo. So how can you claim that this is me and not the other person? That's why I always like the idea of contributing. We are contributing to change, but we are not the reason why the change is actually the way I would do it. And I think that staying small in terms of what you want to track, instead of trying to track everything, so that the various activities are contributing to that thing that you are actually tracking. The challenge also is, if you do not, for example, find out the knowledge level of the particular issue, and then you don't know how much people know about that issue, then you do all the capacity building and so forth, and then you say that, oh yes, we have increased knowledge, but you have no evidence to show that actually you did that. It becomes problematic. One of the ways, obviously, is to do a pre-intervention assessment, for example. So as you organize your forum, your capacity development forum, you take a post-training, and then you compare, how they were when they entered and how they were when they left. And you can actually even track that later. So really, it's always a challenge. It's always a challenge, especially if you're doing advocacy. It's always a challenge because change takes like forever to occur. That's why with donors, and not demand too much attribution, to trust that the work we do is good work. But trust alone is not enough. Sometimes they also want numbers. They want evidence that actually you did not go and buy yourself, actually did the work. So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. With regard to matching, yes. In fact, you are all supposed to be in the same forum, except for COVID. We had thought we would bring all of you together and then we'll do the matching. But now with COVID and physical distancing, we had to go back and say, no, look, let's split them, and then we'll match later, depending on the needs that people express. And I think that in a moment, Irene will share the questionnaire, which then will help us see how we can match it. I think.
Is it okay if I just give it out so that we can continue discussing?
Even as we're discussing.
Yeah. Just managing.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's all right. Is there any additional comment? Yes. I think my eyes now. Veronica. When is Veronica Nani? That's Veronica, yes.
No. I'm Veronica, so yes. So just hearing you speak and my thought has been drawn on asking ambitious of the results you can achieve in a very short time. Because I'm imagining, I hear some partners here doing a 1 year program.
Yeah.
Some of us are doing 2 years. Within the 1 year, you're still finding yourself.
Yeah.
So you only have 1 year to implement. And I'll give an example. We did Forum Sud phase, now Forum 6, it's still getting Forum 6 phase 1, and it was 2017 through 2019. And the idea was just to increase the number of women who get into leadership position. That was both political and non-political. So political was very easy. You can say we have this number of people getting to women MCAs. Just the other day, we are trying to develop a policy for Nyeri County, and we were having interviews. And the people I see, they are women I trained in 2017. They're in Maendeleo ya Wanawake. So the project is already done, but now the results are coming a year later after you wrapped up your project. So, yeah, I think the timing is very, and as you, something else I've asked with an arts-based partner, I think it's something good and it should be very deliberate, not a touch and go. It should be. I know if I'm paired with Damaris and Bidada, we are running projects concurrently. So as I do my activity, we usually do it together so that we have the you've called it
cognitive and affective.
Yes.
Now, I hear you completely. And in fact, the best type of programming normally is where you have long-term funding. Huh? But of course, we also have a couple of results we can start showing. But even if it's closing in 2 years, the possibility of it morphing into being morphed into something else, which runs for another 2 years, is also very, very useful. So the 1 year project-based funding, useful, but I think that it should also be seen to have modest results. Maybe becomes a catalyst to certain change. And you know also change happens at different levels. For instance, you might be getting into a community that is on the tipping point of change. So you become now the catalyst that flips it. You're the one who just, now they are really ready. All they required was just a little fuel. And you provided them, and they are now able to do. So it's also unfair to say that you are the one who made the change happen. Because there was a lot of work that had been done by others before you came on board. You were just, it was just an opportunity for you, just lucky that you happened to be at the goalpost when the ball was passed. And then you just passed it and you stand like Ronaldo, like the score. But the work has begun quite a while back. And I think this is the challenge always with the work that we do. I think that if we focus too much on the results and reporting to our donors, I think we should always report the donors. I mean, we should spend our money properly. We should be able to stay focused on the activities that are processing. And so but I think that we should, and remember what I say, that the development partner should not be the end game. They are not the end game. The end game is to change our communities, our society, to make it better. That should be the end game. So it's also increasing understanding from the donor community about the context and the pace of, I mean, personally I've been involved in policy change in this country for a while. And it's the most frustrating. Suddenly, the leadership changes, the bureaucracy changes, and we have new guys, and they have to like, can you tell us, when you guys were doing this, what were you trying to do? And just as you're about to finish, those ones are transferred, other guys come in. So how do you deal with that, you see? So it's also allowing our development partners to understand the challenges that we face as civil society organizations, and to trust that actually the work we do does bring about the change, but also for us to give every project our best. So what you have on your tables is a first attempt at trying to match the Wajigwetu partners. You will see that there is a question about what it is that you'd like to know, to learn, the approach. Is there a tool, is there a creative approach that you'd like to carry with you? So if you know it, if you know who can give you that skill, from the Wajibwetu partners, might you know who could give you that skill? Whether they are within human rights, gender, democracy, or arts, culture, media, is there something that you think they are doing which could be useful to you? So you tell us who they are, if you know them. If you don't, it's still all right. We will be able to pick from our knowledge of the partners to explore what that partner could actually help you to enhance yourself. In view of the work you have been doing, is there an approach or a tool you'd like to introduce that you haven't introduced? Without additional budget, is there something you'd like to do? Is there an approach you'd like to adopt without moving away from your budget lines? And if so, what? What is it that you'd like to do as an approach or as a strategy you'd like to use during the time of your project? And what we would then do is to explore how that could actually be done without affecting your budget. Because we know that your budget is limited, and you have a set of activities which are budgeted for. But supposing we were to facilitate something for you, what would it look like? That enhances your work. Tunaelewana? It enhances your work, does not interfere with your budget, and that skill or that approach is available within the Wajibwetu partners, or might be available within the Wajibwetu partners. It might be, you might not know whether it's available. I think it will be our responsibility to look whether to see whether that skill is available there. Sasa jamani, nafikiri tumeendelea vizuri. I think we've done justice to the meeting. I continue encouraging all of us to keep learning and to keep helping each other for the sake of our country, for the sake of the young and the old, for the sake of the men and women in our country, to make this country better for all of us. So that whatever we do, we do that. We do those things because they will make our country better for all of us. That should be the end game, really. So we are building inclusive societies, inclusive communities, with that our urbanization, our growth is more inclusive than it currently is, that we are challenging inequalities and marginalization and exclusion and so on, that we would like to take everybody with us as we transform the country. That's the vision, really, and that the resources we get from our development partners are just fuel to help us achieve that goal. Bila kupoteza hilo. I want now to shift gears a little bit, unless there is a last one more comment. Oh, there are quite a few comments. Wow. So we start. Tuanzie kwa Betty, alafu tuje. Okay, Betty.
I just wanted to, there's a comment you made about language.
Yes.
And for me, I just reflected on how, as we used to get, a number of times, our engagement is based on certain prejudices and our emotions. And a lot of times they influence the survival instincts. And so we can actually end up in the language of harm, which in itself continues to put communities in that bad mood. So I was thinking, in this study that you were doing, how do we harmonize, or how do we recognize that we are a divided country, and that division has not, civil society has not in any way not been affected by those divisions? We have them, and that sometimes those divisions also influence the way we engage in design our programs. But in my view, what we are talking about today, the whole issue about transformation. How does transformation lead to harm? How does the whole issue about changing our thinking not go from negative to more negative because of the influences? And then we use external partners to do theatre. I mean, to come in and engage in that conversation using art. Perhaps one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, do we have some sort of, do we design a minimum in terms of the messaging? So we start trying to see whether we can get coherence. So if I'm doing CBE in Kisumu and somebody is doing it in Northeastern and in Coast, what exactly is the language we're using? And how do I make sure that the language is not about to now, and then somebody else because of my religion, and then another one because of my political affiliation? Because those conversations actually find themselves in their way in terms of how we engage. And the other thing also is, how do we then ensure that that coherence is able to influence a national transformation? Because Wajigeti is not just about Migori working in isolation. It's about all the partners across in the whole country where they're based, adding on top of the other to change. And that change is supposed to be both vertical and horizontal. But in the absence of having this common language, how then can we claim that we are able to achieve the overall objective? How does this program then look into ways, or how, as you still continue to do this study, how do we factor that inside so that we're actually saying that as I'm trying to change, it's not just seesaw net, but it is happy, it is what, there's a common thread that runs right in this.
I think that's a very good question, Betty. Let me just say that civil society organizations are a product of the tensions and formations in the larger society. So the contradictions that you find in the larger society, find the same contradictions within civil society. So the same contradictions, the same tensions. So what then becomes our responsibility? Our responsibility is to ask ourselves the question, what is our role? Because you have, for you to be able to bring about the change that we want, at least with regard to the philosophy of Wajigwetu, is that you must be committed to inclusion as a critical component. The philosophy itself requires that you say that we respect human rights. These human rights are interdependent, they are indivisible, they are universal. So you have to subscribe that philosophy. Because if you don't subscribe that philosophy, it becomes very difficult for you to be part of the Wajigwetu family. So the family itself has a philosophical grounding. And the philosophical grounding is that you subscribe to the philosophy of respecting human rights. You subscribe to the philosophy of gender equality. You subscribe to the philosophy of a democratic, inclusive society. Okay. So to the extent that you subscribe to that, so what type of messaging do you carry with you? Of course, it is always such a big challenge to have singularity of messaging. But you cannot in the process of our proposals being evaluated, I would imagine that part of the evaluation looks at the approaches that we are using and the philosophy of our intervention. That's how they evaluate. So that when they are evaluating, they are also looking at what type of institution are you? What do you represent? What's your vision? What is your goal? What's your mission? And so on and so on. What is your history in terms of delivery on these areas? And even if they were being experimental, chances are that your track record will allow you to. So I think that it is to take the view that all the partners in Wajigwetu are not delivering contradictory messaging. We have to take that view. Because if you don't take that view, you will really struggle. We have to believe in each other. And believing in each other is to say, we all respect human rights, we are committed to democracy, we are committed to gender equality, all of us. And that if in the process of messaging, there is something that we notice that undermines these principles, then we can call you aside and say, the approach you have taken actually undermines what we are all trying to do. Can you do a revision? That's why we can talk about monitoring and reviewing our work consistently, so that we can see whether there are unexpected consequences of our interventions. But our takeoff is that we are really right. So I would not say that we have to have a singular message. I think we have to have a singular philosophy which respects human rights, equality, and democracy. So that is what we have in uniformity. Then we can now say, what is your activity doing? So if you are doing your anti-radicalization, we are saying we are doing that because we believe in the right to life, of all human beings, and that radicalization, in a sense, leads to terrorism, which leads to all sorts of violence and so on and so on. So I think that Betty, you get the trust. With regard to the creative sector undermining, for example, human rights and undermining some of in the packaging, I completely agree with you. Because the creative sector itself is part of the larger society. And unless they have raised those issues to the level of consciousness, for example, they have understood that you cannot continue objectifying the body of women for financial gain. Until they have reached there, they'll continue objectifying it. So then what becomes our responsibility? Our responsibility is to say that we will work with artists who recognize that the objectification of women and their bodies is unacceptable. It's a violation of their right. That those are the ones we are going to work with. And we have the right to choose who to work with and who not to work with. So this is the way I would do it. And of course, we also have a responsibility to work with others, to liberate them from the attitudes and perspectives that they have about the world. So that is also our vocation. That's also our responsibility, because we know the sector influences perceptions in the community. So we elevate them, we liberate them from those perceptions through continuous education and so on. And I think that that's something we should always be able to do. The elevation of up to the national level, obviously, absolutely. I mean, it's again through networks. Those of us who are working in the county, those ones that are working nationally, how can we build partnership to shift things at the national level, so that we all feel like we belong. Fair enough? Betty? No, Ruth.
Thank you very much. I feel like we should take a second and stretch.
Thank you. Thank you. We stand up?
Yeah, let me issue some instructions.
Okay.
this is the challenge of having field officers and such things. We are used to field work, so we can't do our thing. Your body starts reacting in a different manner. So I'll say stand, you will stand. Listen first. The first, I will give you some instructions. I'll say stand, you will stand. I'll say sit, then you'll sit. Then in the second phase, I will interchange the instruction. So I'll say sit, you will stand. Then I say stand, you will sit. Clear? Why do you look unhappy?
No.
Okay, so you're going to be a smile.
I think we can.
So, stand. Give us a stand. Sit.